After losing his wife and seeing his son paralyzed, a father hides behind cameras and cutting-edge treatments. Nothing breaks the child's silence until a caregiver appears, offering no promises, only presence. With soft songs, gentle stories, and attentive eyes, she builds a bridge that even science could not reach. And in that delicate crossing, one word pierces the emptiness. Father,
Αν
if
αυτή η
this
ιστορία σας
story
ενδιέφερε,
interested you,
μην
don't
ξεχάσετε να
forget to
εγγραφείτε στο κανάλι
subscribe
μας
to
και
our
να μας
channel
πείτε από
and
ποια
tell
πόλη
us
μας
which city
βλέπετε.
you're watching us
Συνεχίζουμε.
from. Let's
Η έπαυλη των
continue.
βασιλείου στην
The
Εκάλη,
Alden
μια
family
αριστοκρατική
mansion
συνοικία
in
της Αθήνας,
Belgravia
ήταν
Gardens,
γνωστή για
an
την
affluent
διακριτική της
neighborhood in
πολυτέλεια
London,
και τις
was
κομψές
known for
κοινωνικές
its discreet
συναθρήσεις
luxury
που
and the
διοργάνωναν ο
elegant
Μαυρίκιος
social
και η Ελίζα
gatherings
τα
that
βράδια της
Dr.
Παρασκευής.
Maurice and Eliza hosted on Friday evenings.
Το
The
ζευγάρι
couple
είχε
had built
χτίσει
a
μια
life
αξιοζήλευτη ζωή στα
enviable
μάτια
in the eyes
όσων
of
τους
those who
παρατηρούσαν.
observed them.
Αυτός,
He,
ένας από τους
one of the
μεγαλύτερους
country's
επιχειρηματίες
biggest
του
real estate
κτηματομεσητικού
moguls.
τομέα της χώρας,
She,
εκείνη,
a renowned
μια
architect,
αφημισμένη αρχιτέκτονας,
specializing in
ειδικευμένη σε
sustainable
βιώσιμα
projects.
έργα.
And there
Και
was
υπήρχε ο
Arthur,
Αρθούρος,
their
ο
9-year-old
9χρονος
son,
γιος τους.
a
Ένα
sensitive and
ευαίσθητο και έξυπνο
intelligent
αγόρι
boy
που είχε
who had
κληρονομήσει την
inherited his
οξυδέρκεια του
father's
πατέρα του
acumen
και τη
and his mother's
δημιουργικότητα της μητέρας του.
creativity. But
Όμως
that
αυτή η έπαυλη,
mansion,
που
once a
κάποτε ήταν
setting for
σκηνικό γέλιων,
laughter,
συζητήσεων και μουσικής,
conversations and music,
τώρα αντιχούσε μόνο με
now
τον ήχο
echoed
ιατρικών
only with the sound
μηχανημάτων,
of medical
τεχνικών φωνών και
equipment,
κλινικών
technical
αναφορών.
voices, and
Είχαν περάσει
clinical
2 χρόνια από
reports.
το ατύχημα στον
It
δρόμο
had
για την
been 2
Αράχοβα,
years since the
μια
accident
μετοπική
on the road
σύγκρουση
to the
που είχε
Cotswolds,
πάρει την
a
Ελίζα και
head-on
είχε αφήσει
collision
τον
that
Αρθούρο
had taken
τετραπληγικό, καθυλωμένο
Eliza
σε
and
ένα
left
παιδικό καροτσάκι
Arthur
και βυθισμένο σε
quadriplegic,
απόλυτη σιωπή.
confined to a wheelchair and plunged into absolute silence. The boy, who loved to tell fanciful stories and compose small melodies on the living room piano, hadn't uttered a single word since. Then, Dr. Maurice Eldon transformed his grief into an obsession with efficiency. The mansion gained elevators, ramps, state-of-the-art equipment. Arthur's room became a care unit, similar to European hospitals, with constant monitoring and the best specialists money could hire. There were protocols for everything: feeding, physiotherapy, neurological stimulation, progress reports. The house operated in precise shifts, with serious and competent professionals who treated the boy as an exceptional research case. The cerebral oxygenation report has arrived, Dr. Alden informed Helen, the housekeeper who coordinated the entire structure with military precision. We also received confirmation of the virtual reality equipment's arrival from Switzerland for next week. Dr. Maurice merely nodded, his eyes fixed on the spreadsheets on his laptop. This was how he dealt with the situation, through numbers, statistics, and recovery goals. There was no room for emotions when efficiency was paramount. His office in the mansion had transformed into a kind of command center, with screens monitoring every room in the house, especially Arthur's. Dr. Vance called confirming tomorrow's appointment. Helen continued, "He wants to discuss the new neuromuscular stimulation protocols. Excellent. Schedule a video conference with the Zurich team after that. I want to compare the results," he replied without taking his eyes off the screens. And deep down, that routine was the shield Dr. Maurice had created to avoid facing the true abyss, guilt. The accident had happened after a heated argument with Eliza about his absence from family moments. He was driving too fast, irritated, when the tire blew out on the bend. This was a truth he kept locked in his chest, submerged under layers of work and clinical efficiency. His visits to his son's room were brief and scheduled, always at the same time, for the same duration. Following a mental script of questions and comments he deemed appropriate. He sat at a safe distance, reported news about projects, asked if Arthur was comfortable questions that never received answers, and left promptly after the stipulated time. Physical contact was minimal, a light touch on the shoulder, or an adjustment of the pillow. Anything beyond that would open the floodgates of pain he wasn't prepared to face. The list of specialists who had passed through the house was extensive and international. Neurologists from Harvard, physiotherapists from Canada, alternative communication specialists from Germany, occupational therapists from Japan. All brought theories, innovative techniques, and veiled promises of breakthroughs, which invariably resulted in small physical improvements but no emotional or communicative reconnection. We need to accept that the case presents neuropsychological complexities beyond the physical trauma, explained the latest neurologist, Dr. Ramirez, in her farewell video conference. There's something we're not reaching with our conventional approaches. Dr. Maurice hated this kind of inconclusiveness. Problems, in his businessman's view, existed to be solved with adequate resources, planning, and persistence. He refused to accept that there were issues beyond science and technology. It was in this context that Helen mentioned the recommendation of a new caregiver, something Dr. Maurice initially dismissed. We already have a complete team of highly qualified professionals. Why would we need anyone else? It's different, Dr. Alden. This young woman worked with similar cases at St. Thomas's Hospital. She has a different approach. She combines technical nursing with the more human methodology. Helen carefully chose her words, knowing her employer's skepticism. Dr. Ramirez personally recommended her after they handled a similar case together. Dr. Maurice hesitated, his calculating mind evaluating the cost-benefit of another attempt. What are her credentials? Graduated in nursing from University College London, specialized in neurology, worked 2 years at Great Ormond Street Hospital. She's young, but very well recommended, and her name, Carolyn Martins. She's from Cornwall. Dr. Maurice sighed, rubbing his tired eyes. Reports from recent months showed a worrying stagnation in Arthur's recovery indicators. Perhaps it was time to try something new, even if only to maintain the sense of movement, of doing something. Schedule a video interview. The conversation with Caroline was brief and pragmatic. She didn't fit the typical profile of specialists he usually hired. She didn't boast international titles or cite cutting-edge studies. She spoke with direct simplicity about presence, concepts that sounded too vague for the businessman accustomed to precise metrics. My job is to establish a bridge of trust, she explained. We can't force a return, but we can't create an environment where it's possible. Against his usual instinct, Dr. Maurice decided to hire her, a controlled experiment, as he mentally defined it. Caroline would arrive the following week and have a 30-day probationary period. Helen would arrange her accommodation in the room next to the winter garden. That night, alone in his office, after everyone had retired, Dr. Maurice allowed himself a rare moment of vulnerability. He opened the locked drawer of his desk and took out a photograph. Eliza himself and Arthur on the beach, the boy in the middle, laughing. Both parents leaning towards their son, forming a perfect circle of protection. An image from a time that seems to have existed in another life. "I'll fix this," he whispered into the empty room. "Whatever it takes." He put the photo away, recomposed his neutral expression, and returned to the monitoring spreadsheets. The numbers and graphs were predictable, measurable, controllable, unlike the abyss of emotion that threatened to consume him whenever he let down his guard. In less than a week, Caroline would arrive, bringing her different approach. Dr. Maurice didn't harbor great hopes, but something within him, perhaps the last thread of faith he hadn't yet cut, secretly yearned for a miracle that all the machines and protocols hadn't managed to produce. Carolyn Martins arrived at the Alden mansion on a Wednesday morning, carrying only a medium suitcase and a handbag. Unlike previous specialists who came with equipment, study folders and assistants, she seemed unadorned and simple. She wore jeans, a white shirt, and a light jacket. Her curly hair was tied in a messy bun, and her makeup-free face revealed a few discreet freckles. Helen, the housekeeper, received her with her usual formality, handing her a thick procedures manual and a folder with Arthur's complete medical history. "Dr. Alden requests that you be completely familiar with the protocols by tomorrow," Helen explained, leading her through the immaculate corridors of the mansion. "The daily schedule is on page 27, and dietary restrictions on 42. Carolyn merely smiled, holding the manual without opening it. "Thank you. I'll study everything carefully." Her designated room was on the ground floor, overlooking the winter garden, a glass-enclosed space where tropical plants grew under controlled temperature. It was simple compared to the luxury of the rest of the house, but comfortable and functional. "The uniforms are in the closet," Helen continued, opening the doors to show 3 perfectly ironed white sets. "We hope they are the correct size. Breakfast at 6:30 a.m., lunch at 12 p.m., dinner at 7 p.m. The times for using the common areas are in the manual." "And when can I meet Arthur?" Carolyn asked, placing her suitcase on the bed. Helen seemed slightly disconcerted by the direct question. "Dr. Alden prefers that you first familiarize yourself with the case, the equipment, and the protocols. Afterwards, he himself will make the formal introductions." Caroline nodded, but something in her gaze made it clear she had her own ideas about how to proceed. That first night, while dining alone in the kitchen, professionals did not share meals with the family. She opened the manual and medical folders. She leafed through reports, exams, and assessments carefully, but without the clinical anxiety that characterized the other professionals. Occasionally, she smiled or frowned, as if conversing silently with the papers in front of her. The night shift nurse, Denise, watched her with curiosity. "Aren't you taking notes?" she finally asked. Caroline looked up and smiled. "I'm absorbing. Notes will come later. Have you had cases like Arthur's before?" "Every case is unique," she replied simply. "But I have been with children who shut down after trauma, yes." "And did you get results?" Caroline carefully closed the folder. "I managed to be present in a way that's made a difference." The next day, after a full morning of technical orientations about the equipment in Arthur's medical room, Caroline finally met Dr. Maurice. He was in his office, surrounded by computer screens, when she was called for what Helen called final instructions. "Miss Martins," he began, without lifting his eyes from the documents he was signing, "I hope you are adapting well to our structure." "I am, thank you." "Excellent. As you must have noticed in the reports, Arthur presents with quadriplegia and neuropsychological complications. Physically, we have achieved stabilization and even small progress, but the communicative part remains stagnant. Zero verbalization, minimal eye contact, limited response to stimuli." As he spoke, Dr. Maurice maintained a clinical tone, as if discussing a complex business case. Caroline noticed that he avoided using phrases like "my son" or any terminology that denoted emotional connection. "I understand," she replied. "I read the reports carefully. Your probationary period will be 30 days. I expect daily reports on any implemented approach and observed results. We have monitoring cameras in all rooms, including Arthur's room, for safety and medical follow-up purposes." Caroline nodded, showing no discomfort with the constant surveillance. When can I meet him? For the first time, Dr. Maurice looked up from his papers. There was something calculating in his gaze, as if he was trying to decipher the true intentions of the young woman in front of him. Right now, if you prefer, Helen will accompany you. Arthur's room occupied the entire east wing of the second floor. It was spacious, bright, and equipped like a small private clinic. Heart monitors, advanced physiotherapy equipment, a state-of-the-art motorized wheelchair, and an adjustable hospital bed dominated the environment. The walls, painted in a soft shade of blue, were decorated with seascape paintings, an impersonal attempt to make the space less clinical. Arthur was in his wheelchair near the window, observing the garden. Small for his age, thin, with neatly combed brown hair. He wore comfortable but formal clothes, a polo shirt, sweatpants. His face was impassive, his eyes fixed on the horizon, without truly seeing it. "Good morning, Arthur. This is Caroline, your new caregiver," Helen announced mechanically, as if introducing another piece of equipment. "She will be with you in the afternoon, replacing Nurse Rivers." Caroline waited for Helen to move away, and then approached slowly. She didn't position herself in front of the boy, blocking his view, as many did. Instead, she sat beside him, in the same line of sight, also looking at the garden. "It's a beautiful view," she commented, as if simply starting a casual conversation. "Those orange flowers, they look like trumpet trees. My grandmother had one in her backyard in Cornwall. Every year we eagerly awaited the exact moment it burst into bloom." Her tone was calm, without the artificial or childish intonation that many adults use when speaking to children. She simply talked, with no expectation of a response. "My name is Carol, and I'll be around some afternoons. You don't have to answer or do anything. I just wanted to introduce myself." She remained there in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Then, unhurriedly, she began to organize some items on the nearby table. Helen watched from the doorway, clearly surprised by the non-protocol approach. In the days that followed, Caroline established her own routine with Arthur. She performed all necessary medical procedures, vital sign checks, correct positioning in the chair, hydration, but added elements that no other professional had attempted. She brought a different book each day and read aloud, without pressing for attention or a response. She commented on the weather, the colors of the sky, the birds that landed in the garden. Sometimes she hummed softly while organizing the room. Other times she remained silent, just present. A special touch was the moments of physical care that she transformed into rituals of connection. While applying cream to Arthur's hands to prevent dryness, she massaged each finger with attention, commenting on the skin's texture or the shape of his nails. When combing his hair, she made gentle movements, describing its shine or softness. "Your hair is a beautiful wave at the end, did you know?" she would say. "It reminds me of the calm sea at Brighton Beach when it touches the sand." There were no goals, demands, or expectations in the interactions. Caroline was simply there, offering full presence and genuine human contact. Unlike the other professionals, she didn't treat Arthur's silence as a problem to be solved, but as a form of communication to be respected. At the end of each day she wrote reports as requested, but avoided using the impersonal clinical language that dominated the house. "Arthur seemed to enjoy the story about birds today," she wrote, "or during sunset. I noticed his eyes followed the changing colors in the sky for several minutes." Dr. Maurice read these reports with growing suspicion. The subjective language and immeasurable observations irritated his sense of precision. More than once, he called Helen to question the new caregiver's methodology. Is she following the basic protocols? he asked during the first week. Yes, sir. All medical procedures are executed as established. But she adds things. What kind of things? Conversations, music, readings. She treats the boy as if he were present. Dr. Morris frowned. And the results? Helen hesitated. Technically, there are no measurable changes. But, the night shift nurse commented that Arthur seems less tense at bedtime since Caroline started. And Dr. Sanders observed that the stress indicators on the monitors have dropped slightly. Dr. Maurice dismissed Helen with a gesture, but that night, after everyone had retired, he accessed the recordings from Arthur's room. He watched Caroline reading a story about ancient navigators, her tone calm and engaging. He watched how she adjusted the chair so Arthur could better see the sunset, and how she sat beside him to enjoy it together. Something in that scene deeply disturbed him, an intimacy, a connection that he himself couldn't establish with his own son. For a moment, he felt a sharp pang of jealousy, immediately followed by guilt, and, finally, a spark of hope he dared not name. After 2 weeks in the Alden mansion, Caroline had already established a presence that, though discreet, began to subtly alter the atmosphere of the house. Staff who once moved with the rigidity of professionals in a hospital environment now occasionally exchanged smiles or shared small observations about the weather or the garden flowers. The soft music she played during Arthur's care sometimes escaped through partially open doors, filtering into the previously silent corridors. Dr. Maurice perceived these changes with a mixture of irritation and curiosity. From the safety of his office, he monitored the activities through the cameras, observing the routine Caroline had created with his son. It wasn't just the technical procedures that caught his attention, but the moments between them, the naturalness with which she occupied the space beside Arthur, as if his silence was just a pause in a continuous conversation. On a particularly sunny afternoon, he watched on the computer screen as Caroline opened the curtains in the room, allowing natural light to flood the space. "Look at that sky, Arthur," she commented, adjusting his chair so he could see better. "Indigo blue. It's the color my grandmother said Yemanya wears on special days." She sat on the bench by the window, opened a small, worn, blue-covered book, and began to read in a low, melodious voice. Once upon a time there was a boy who discovered he could talk to the sea. It wasn't just any conversation. The sea doesn't use words like us. It speaks through the movement of the waves, the sparkle of the sun on the water. The smell of the sea, air ... Dr. Maurice increased the volume, intrigued despite his usual suspicion. The story was simple, almost childish, but there was something in the way Caroline modulated her voice, pausing at the right moments, that created an engaging atmosphere. For the first time he noticed something that put him on alert. Arthur's eyes, previously so fixed on the void, discreetly followed her movements as she turned the pages. It was a minimal movement, almost imperceptible to anyone not observing carefully. But it was there, a spark of interest, of conscious presence he hadn't seen in his son for a long time. Immediately, Dr. Maurice pressed the intercom. "Helen, I need a complete report of Arthur's vital signs for the last 48 hours, and schedule a meeting with the medical team for early tomorrow." He didn't want to harbor unfounded hopes. He needed data, measurable evidence, before allowing any optimism to contaminate his pragmatic approach. But that night, against his habit, he stayed up late analyzing the previous day's recordings, looking for other, similar moments he might have missed. The next morning, Dr. Sampson, a neurologist who had been following Arthur for over a year, listened attentively as Dr. Maurice described his observations. Her experienced face maintained professional neutrality, but something in her eyes betrayed a renewed interest. "It's possible we're seeing the first signs of cognitive re-engagement," she commented, analyzing the brain activity charts. "The patterns here show small changes in associative areas during the periods when Miss Martins is present. Is that significant?" Dr. Maurice asked, keeping his tone controlled despite the anxiety growing in his chest. "Potentially. Traumas like Arthur's can result not only in physical damage, but in a deep psychological shutdown. Sometimes the brain needs to feel safe again before re-establishing certain types of connection with the outside world. And how would that be explained scientifically?" The doctor smiled discreetly, recognizing Dr. Maurice's need to translate everything into objective terms. "Neuroplasticity facilitated by an emotionally secure environment. Recent studies show that a traumatized brain can create new neural pathways more easily when cortisol levels, the stress hormone, are reduced and oxytocin levels, associated with social bonding, are increased." That explanation, though simplified, momentarily satisfied Dr. Maurice's need for rationality. He authorized the continuation of the Martins approach, as he began to call it internally, but intensified monitoring and measurements. That same afternoon, something even more significant happened. Caroline brought a small music box into the room, a personal object that was not part of the approved arsenal of therapeutic equipment. It was an old box made of dark wood with mother-of-pearl details that had belonged to her grandmother. "This is a treasure to me, Arthur," she explained, sitting close to him. "When I was little and got sick, my grandmother would put this box near me. She said the music had healing powers." She turned the small golden key on the side, and a delicate melody filled the room. It was a traditional lullaby, played on metallic, sweet notes that evoked an almost tangible nostalgia. Dr. Maurice, who was following the scene on the computer screen, adjusted the audio and zoomed in on his son's face. Something was happening. Arthur's lips trembled slightly, and his eyes fixed on the music box with unusual intensity. For a very brief instant, the boy emitted a sound, not a word, just a breath. An exhalation that carried the distant echo of a voice. Alarmed and hopeful, Dr. Maurice stood up abruptly, ready to rush to the room. Then he stopped, suddenly feeling like an intruder. Caroline had not reacted with excitement or celebration to the small sound. Instead, she continued calmly, as if that response was the most natural thing in the world. "Beautiful, isn't it? They say this melody is over 100 years old. It traveled from Portugal to England on immigrant ships," her fingers lightly caressed Arthur's motionless hand as the music continued. The boy maintained eye contact with her now, not just a fleeting glance, but continuous minutes of focused attention. Dr. Maurice sat down again, torn between exaltation and a strange feeling of exclusion. He was witnessing a miracle, small, fragile, but undeniable, and yet he felt distant from it, as if observing through thick glass. Caroline had achieved, in weeks, what teams of specialists hadn't accomplished in 2 years. How? What was in that simple, almost rudimentary approach compared to the sophisticated protocols he had implemented? In the days that followed, Dr. Maurice reorganized his schedule to be able to follow Caroline's sessions with Arthur more closely. The staff noticed, surprised, that their employer now spent more time at the mansion and less at his company's central office. He avoided interfering directly, preferring to observe through the monitors, mentally cataloguing every small progress, every subtle reaction. The music box became a daily ritual. Caroline always brought it at the same time, when the afternoon sun began to soften, creating a golden atmosphere in the room. Sometimes she hummed along with the melody. Other times she just let the notes speak for themselves. On one of those afternoons she added something new, a story about the origin of the music. She spoke of a Portuguese girl who traveled on a ship across the Atlantic, bringing only the music box as a memento of home. She described the fear of storms, the seasickness in rough waters, and how the melody reminded everyone that permanent things existed even amidst instability. Do you know what I like most about this story, Arthur? That sometimes we need to leave the safe to find something new, even when we're scared, even when it seems impossible. It was a simple, almost banal message, but there was something in the way she looked directly at the boy as she spoke that suggested deeper layers of meaning. To Dr. Marazzi's surprise, watching silently from the screen, Arthur blinked twice consecutively, a gesture that might have gone unnoticed, but which he recognized immediately. Before the accident, that had been the personal code between father and son. 2 blinks meant I understand or I agree. It was a sign they used in tedious social gatherings or in situations where they needed to communicate discreetly. Seeing that gesture resurface after so long made Dr. Maurice feel as if the air had been sucked out of the room. That night he couldn't sleep. He stayed in the office, reviewing old recordings from before the accident, family videos where Arthur ran through the garden, played the living room piano, talked animatedly about his favorite books. He obsessively compared the boy in those images with what he saw now, seeking to confirm that the signal was not a coincidence. In the morning, he called an emergency meeting with the medical team. "I want to know exactly what's happening," he demanded, spreading reports on the table. Neurologically, physiologically, psychologically. Why now? What changed? The specialists exchanged cautious glances before Dr. Vance, the most experienced, responded, "Mr. Alden, there is growing evidence that Miss Martin's approach is creating an environment conducive to reconnection. There isn't a single explanation, but a combination of factors: stress reduction, positive emotional stimuli, relational consistency, ... But why didn't it work before? We had the best protocols, equipment, professionals." An uncomfortable pause followed until the psychologist, Dr. Lewis, spoke up, perhaps because what Arthur needed wasn't more technical intervention, but simply genuine human presence. Someone who treated him as a person, not as a patient. Someone who didn't demand results from him. The words hit Dr. Maurice like a blow. It was a veiled criticism of his approach, of the way he had transformed his son's recovery into a manageable project, with goals and reports. He felt momentary anger, then deep shame, and finally, growing despair. "What should I do then?" The question came out almost as a whisper. Dr. Vance looked at him directly. "Observe what she's doing, and perhaps ... participate." That suggestion, so simple and so impossible at the same time, reverberated in Dr. Moreau's mind for the rest of the day. Participating would mean abandoning the safe distance he had established, the protective barrier of efficiency and control. It would mean facing not only Arthur's current condition, but also the corrosive guilt he had carried since the night of the accident. As he debated this possibility internally, a glitch in the monitoring system forced him into an unexpected decision. The cameras in Arthur's room temporarily stopped working, precisely during the music box hour. Restless and unable to wait for technical repair, Dr. Maurice did something he hadn't done in months. He went to his son's room unannounced, outside his scheduled time. He stopped at the partially open door, listening to the familiar melody and Caroline's soft voice. He took a deep breath, gathering courage, and then stepped forward. Entering an unknown territory where spreadsheets and protocols could not guide him, Dr. Maurice paused at the bedroom door, held back by the scene unfolding before him. Caroline hadn't noticed him yet. Her back was to the entrance, leaning over Arthur's chair. The music box played its nostalgic melody as she spoke softly, almost whispering, ... And so the little blue boat sailed through the storm, always guided by the lighthouse's beam. Even when the waves seemed too big, even when the wind howled fiercely, it kept going. It knew that, on the other side, there would be calm again. Arthur was positioned facing the winter garden window, where the golden late afternoon light created a mosaic of color among the plants. His eyes were fixed on Caroline, following her every movement with an attention Dr. Maurice hadn't seen in years. It wasn't just a vague glance in her direction, it was focus, presence, connection. The businessman felt a lump in his throat. There was something so intimate, so sacred about that interaction, that he felt like an intruder. He was about to retreat silently when Caroline turned Arthur's chair and saw him. Her eyes widened momentarily in surprise, but she quickly recovered and smiled. "Good afternoon, Mr. Alden. We were just finishing our story session, Doctor." Maurice nodded stiffly, unable to find words. His eyes met Arthur's, and for a fleeting instant he seemed to see a spark of recognition there. It wasn't imagination, his son was truly seeing him. "Please don't let me interrupt," he finally managed to say. "You're not interrupting," Caroline replied naturally. "In fact, I just introduced Arthur to a collection of old English songs. I thought they might bring back some family memories." She moved aside, making space, a silent invitation for him to approach. Dr. Maurice hesitated, caught between the desire to move forward and the impulse to retreat to the safety of his usual detachment. Finally, he took a few steps into the room, stopping at a safe distance from the chair. "What kind of music?" "Songs by Harry Belafonte, some by Burt Bacharach, others my grandmother used to sing," Caroline explained, delicately adjusting the pillow supporting Arthur's neck. "Songs that speak of the sea, of departures and returns." There was something in the way she mentioned returns that seemed to carry additional meaning. Dr. Maurice felt exposed, as if she could see through his carefully constructed defenses. "Arthur ... does he respond to them?" Caroline looked at the boy with a gentle smile. "He listens. He really listens. And sometimes when a song touches something deep, his eyes change. It's subtle, but it's there." At that moment, as if on cue, Arthur blinked twice consecutively. The same Maurice had noticed days before. The father felt his heart race, but maintained his outward composure. "I'll let you continue," he said, stepping back a few paces. As he reached the door, Caroline called out to him, "Mr. Alden, you're welcome to join us any day. I'm sure Arthur would like that." He nodded without responding and left quickly, feeling suffocated by emotions he had suppressed for so long. In the deserted corridor, he leaned against the wall for a moment, breathing deeply to regain control. What he had just witnessed challenged the entire narrative he had built about Arthur's conditioned, the idea that his son was present only in body, but absent in spirit. In the days that followed, Dr. Maurice became a more frequent presence in the mansion. He reorganized his schedule, delegated meetings, cancelled trips. His assistants and partners noticed the change, but he offered only vague explanations about urgent family matters. The truth that he was witnessing, his son's slow awakening, seemed too precious to share, as if naming that hope might make it disappear. Instead of monitoring through cameras, he now occasionally passed by the room during Caroline's sessions, pretending to check something or bring a message. Sometimes he stayed for a few minutes, observing the interactions from afar. He noticed how she created small but significant rituals: the evening reading, the music at dusk, the moment of watching birds in the garden. On a particularly warm afternoon, Caroline suggested something unusual. "I was thinking of taking Arthur to the winter garden. The change of environment could be stimulating, and the plants create a different atmosphere from the room." Helen, who was present, immediately expressed concerns. "That's not on the schedule. We'd need to reorganize the physiotherapy time, check the appropriate temperature, prepare the path for the chair. We can do that," Dr. Maurice interrupted, to everyone's surprise, including his own. "Make the necessary adjustments." The next day, for the first time in months, Arthur left the confinement of his room. The operation was coordinated with the precision of a military mission: nurses checking portable equipment, a physiotherapist adjusting the chair's position, a doctor on duty supervising every movement. To Dr. Maurice, observing from a distance, it seemed simultaneously excessive and insufficient. The winter garden was an imposing structure in the center of the mansion, a large glass dome housing a collection of tropical plants, small stone paths, and a central reflecting pool. Eliza, an architect by profession, had designed the space as a refuge from urban hustle. After her passing, Dr. Maurice kept the area impeccably maintained by a team of gardeners. Caroline guided Arthur's chair along a gentle path between ferns and orchids. The natural light filtered through the glass panels created an almost dreamlike environment, with golden beams cutting through the humid air. She spoke softly, pointing out specific plants, commenting on colors and textures. To any casual observer it would seem like a normal conversation. Despite the silence from one of the parties, Dr. Maurice remained a few feet away, pretending to work on his tablet while observing. He saw how Caroline stopped the chair near a small fountain, where water flowed gently over polished stones. She took Arthur's hand and gently brought it closer to the water flow, allowing his fingers to feel the dampness and temperature. "Water has memory, did you know?" she commented in a conversational tone. "Scientists have discovered that water molecules can maintain patterns. Imagine each drop carrying stories of where it's been." Arthur kept his eyes fixed on the water, and Dr. Maurice noticed something extraordinary. The tips of his son's fingers moved slightly, seeking contact with the water. It wasn't a spasm or an involuntary reflex. It was intentional movement, albeit minimal. The impact of that observation hit Dr. Maurice like a physical wave. He looked away, suddenly unable to contain the emotion rising in his throat. When he looked back, Caroline had positioned the chair near a bed of violets and was now describing them in detail: the delicacy of the petals, the specific shade of purple, the meaning of resilience they carried in the language of flowers. Arthur's face was different. There was color in his cheeks, a liveliness in his eyes that had long been absent. And then, without warning, it happened. A sound escaped his lips, not exactly a word, but clearly an attempt at vocalization. Caroline showed no surprise or exaggerated excitement. She just smiled, as if this was perfectly expected, and continued her description of the flowers. Dr. Maurice felt his tablet slip from his hands. The sound as it hit the stone floor echoed through the glass-enclosed space, attracting everyone's attention. Caroline looked in his direction, and her eyes conveyed a silent message, a mixture of understanding and invitation. "Mr. Alden, perhaps you'd like to show Arthur those rare bromeliads. I heard they were specially brought from the Amazon region." It was an opening. A bridge extended over the abyss he himself had created. Dr. Maurice approached slowly, feeling each step as an act of courage. When he got close to the chair, Caroline discreetly moved away, giving him space. "Yes, they're from the Manors region," he explained, his voice strangely hoarse. "Your mother insisted on bringing them personally. We spent a week in the forest until we found the right species." It was the first time in years he had mentioned Eliza in Arthur's presence without using clinical terms like the accident or after the incident, speaking of her as a real person, as the mother passionately fond of rare plants she had been. Something broke within him. His hands trembled slightly as he pointed to the exotic, vibrant-colored flowers. Arthur turned his face towards him, not completely, but enough to indicate he was following his voice. His eyes, which previously seemed fixed on the void, now sought his father's face with an intensity that left him breathless. "She used to say that plants are like people, Doctor," Maurice continued, the words now coming more easily. "They need the right conditions to flourish, but also space to grow in their own way." A silence settled, not the oppressive silence that had dominated the house for years, but a moment of pause, almost reverential. The sunlight, now lower on the horizon, created golden reflections on the surrounding glass surfaces. Helen and the other staff had retreated, leaving father and son in relative privacy, with Caroline maintaining a respectful distance. Then, in a gesture that seemed to consume all his courage, Dr. Maurice leaned down and touched Arthur's motionless hand on the armrest of the chair. It wasn't just the usual protocol, an aseptic touch, but a true contact, his fingers enveloping his son's, communicating through warmth and pressure what words could not express. Arthur did not physically reciprocate the gesture. His condition did not allow it. But his eyes met his father's and remained there for long seconds, without wavering. And in that gaze was everything Dr. Maurice most feared and most longed for: recognition. Later, after Arthur had been taken back to his room and prepared for sleep, Dr. Maurice found Caroline in the corridor. She was organizing some materials on a small shelf when he approached. For a moment they stood in silence, until he finally spoke. "What happened today, ... in the garden? Was it real?" Caroline smiled softly. "I think my son is coming back. Somehow from somewhere. He's been all these years." His voice failed on the last word. "He never completely left," she replied. "He just retreated to a place where he felt safe." There was a profound simplicity in that explanation that challenged all the complex theories and medical terms that had dominated discussions about Arthur. Dr. Maurice felt a mixture of hope and terror, because if what she said was true, it meant there was something all his money and power could not buy or control. "What should I do now?" The question came out almost as a whisper. Caroline looked at him directly, with a seriousness that contrasted with her usual calm expression. "Be present, not just physically. Truly present, even when it's difficult." The words hit Dr. Maurice like a revelation. Presence, the simplest and most impossible element he had avoided all these years. To be truly there would mean facing not only Arthur's condition, but his own guilt, his own unprocessed grief, his own failure as a father. That night, instead of returning to the office to review reports As was his habit, Dr. Maurice went to Arthur's room. The boy was already in bed, his eyes half closed in the dim light from the bedside lamp. Without announcing his presence, without agenda or defined purpose, he simply sat in the armchair beside the bed. He said nothing. He just sat there, observing his son's rhythmic breathing, the contours of his face that were beginning to lose their childish features and gain adolescent traits. Time passed, minutes or hours, he couldn't say. And in the shared silence, something began to rebuild between them, fragile as the first strand of a web, but undeniably real. When he finally stood to leave, Maurice did something he hadn't done since before the accident. He leaned over the bed and gently kissed Arthur's forehead. "Good night, son," he whispered, his voice almost inaudible. As he reached the door, he looked back one last time. In the dimness of the room, he couldn't say for sure, but he seemed to see the outline of an almost smile on Arthur's lips. The next morning, Dr. Maurice woke with a strange sensation, as if something fundamental had changed during the night. His usual routine of checking emails before even getting out of bed suddenly seemed trivial. Instead, he opened the curtains and watched the rising sun for a few minutes, allowing himself to simply be present in the moment. At breakfast, he surprised Helen by asking for details about Arthur's daily routine that went beyond technical reports. What stories has Caroline been reading to him? What music does he seem to like best? Has he shown a preference for any specific food? The housekeeper hesitated before answering, clearly disconcerted by the change in approach. "Well, he seems to enjoy stories about the sea and journeys." Miss Caroline noticed his eyes become more attentive during these narratives. As for music, her music box seems to have a special effect, but also Burt Bacharach's songs. And lately, he's shown more interest in chocolate ice cream than the plain gelatin that was in the dietary protocol. Dr. Maurice absorbed this information with a new kind of interest, not as data for analysis, but as clues about who his son was becoming, or perhaps who he had always been behind the silence. "Cancel my external meetings this week," he instructed. "I'll work from home." The morning passed with Dr. Maurice dividing his time between unavoidable professional commitments and intermittent visits to Arthur's room. During one of these visits, he found Caroline conducting a physiotherapy session unlike anything he had ever witnessed. Instead of the usual mechanical exercises, she had put on music and transformed the movements into a kind of dance. She held Arthur's arms delicately, moving them to the rhythm of a bossa nova, telling stories about dancers and festivals while working each joint. "My grandmother used to say that the body has its own memory," she explained to the boy. "Sometimes it needs to be reminded of what it once knew how to do." Dr. Maurice watched from the doorway, without interrupting. There was a respectful intimacy in the interaction, a mutual trust that made the scene almost sacred. He realized that Caroline never treated Arthur's limitations with pity or frustration, but as simple realities to be navigated together. And in response, the boy showed a presence, a silent but undeniable participation. At midday, while having lunch alone on the
Maurice
veranda, made a decision. "Doctor," he picked up the phone and made a call he had been postponing for weeks. "Dr. Thompson. Maurice Alden. We need to talk about my son's case. There have been significant developments. The meeting with the chief neurologist was scheduled for late afternoon. Before that, however, something unexpected happened, Dr. Maurice was in his office finishing a video conference with investors when a technical glitch in the presentations caused a delay. Taking advantage of the pause, he quickly checked the cameras in Arthur's room on his tablet, a habit he hadn't completely abandoned yet. What he saw left him paralyzed. Caroline had taken the wheelchair to the winter garden again, but this time something different was happening. She had put on children's music, cheerful, rhythmic, and was gently moving the chair in small circles, like an improvised dance. And Arthur was laughing. It wasn't just a faint smile or a subtle change of expression. It was genuine laughter, loud enough to be picked up by the audio, with flushed cheeks and eyes bright with joy. The boy, who hadn't uttered articulated sounds for 2 years, was laughing like any child during a fun game. Dr. Maurice abruptly ended the video conference, mumbling some excuse about a family emergency. He rushed through the mansion's corridors, guided by the children's melody echoing through the space. When he reached the winter garden, he stopped at the entrance, unable to interrupt the magical scene unfolding. Caroline sang along with the music, spinning the chair in gentle movements that created the illusion of a dance. Arthur had his head thrown back, his face illuminated by the purest, simplest pleasure. His laughter, a sound Dr. Maurice had feared he would never hear again, filled the space like music. For a long moment, the businessman stood motionless, overwhelmed by a storm of emotions, indescribable joy, profound relief, and an overwhelming guilt for all the moments like that he had missed in the last 2 years, hidden behind spreadsheets and reports. When the music ended, Caroline noticed his presence and smiled, without embarrassment or surprise. "Look who came to visit us, Arthur," she said naturally. The boy turned his face in the indicated direction, and his eyes met his father's. The laughter gradually subsided, but did not disappear completely. It remained as a sparkle in his gaze, a lively presence that completely transformed his expression. Dr. Maurice approached slowly, as if fearing to break a spell. When he got close to the chair, he did something he hadn't done in so long it felt like a first time. He knelt to be at his son's eye level. "Hi, Arthur," he said simply, his voice hoarse with emotion. The boy looked at him intensely as if studying him. Then, in a movement that seemed to consume enormous energy, he slightly tilted his head towards his father, not a complete nod, but a deliberate gesture of recognition. Caroline discreetly retreated, giving them space. Dr. Maurice remained there, at Arthur's eye level, unable to speak, but communicating through his gaze everything that words could not express. "The music is from a children's music group called Melody Makers," Caroline explained softly, breaking the silence after a few moments. "Arthur seems to particularly like the rhythm." Dr. Maurice nodded, still absorbing the reality of what he had just witnessed. "Do you do this often?" "We started a few days ago. First in the room, very slowly. Today was our first time here in the garden. There was something in the way she said our first time that deeply touched Dr. Maurice. The idea that she and Arthur formed a team, partners on a journey he observed from outside. May I try?" he asked, indicating the chair. Caroline's eyes lit up. "Of course, I'll show you how." She demonstrated the smooth movements, how to gently sway the chair following the rhythm, always with predictable movements so as not to startle Arthur. Then she stepped back, leaving father and son alone. Dr. Maurice placed his hands on the chair handles, feeling simultaneously powerful and vulnerable. The music continued to play, and he began to move the chair in small circles, clumsy at first, then with more confidence. Initially, Arthur was tense, the laughter completely absent. Dr. Maurice was about to give up when Caroline, observing from afar, nodded encouragingly. He persisted, making the movements smoother, occasionally leaning in to speak softly into his son's ear. "I'm here, Arthur. I'm here with you." Gradually, the tension in the boy's shoulders decreased. He didn't laugh again, but his eyes followed the movements of the plants and the light as the chair spun. In the reflection of a mirrored surface, Dr. Maurice saw his own face, an expression of absolute concentration, his eyes shining with determination. He realized he was smiling, a genuine smile for the first time in a long time. When the music ended, he stopped the chair gently. His eyes met Caroline's, who observed the scene with a serene smile. There was a silent question in her gaze, and she responded with a small nod of approval. "I think it's time for his snack," she said, approaching. "Perhaps you'd like to join him." That simple invitation carried a profound meaning, a bridge extended over the abyss Dr. Maurice had created between himself and his son's daily care. He nodded, unable to trust his own voice. Together, they took Arthur back to his room, where Helen had already prepared a small table with fruits, yogurt, and biscuits. Dr. Maurice observed how Caroline helped the boy eat, discovering that he could communicate preferences through small eye movements and almost imperceptible facial expressions. "He loves mango," she explained, offering a small piece on a spoon. "But only when it's very ripe, with that sweet smell." The afternoon progressed with Dr. Maurice, cancelling the meeting with Dr. Thompson and remaining in the room, observing and occasionally participating in the activities. When bath time arrived, he discreetly withdrew, not yet prepared for that level of intimacy, but promising to return for the bedtime story. Alone in his office for a few minutes, he contemplated what he had witnessed. Arthur's laughter was more than a sound. It was proof of life, a declaration of presence that defied all medical prognoses. And Caroline ... She hadn't done anything extraordinarily technical or innovative. She had simply been present, consistently, without expectations or pressures. When he returned to the room for the bedtime story, he found Arthur already in bed, with Caroline sitting on the edge, ready to read. She offered the book to Dr. Maurice naturally. "Perhaps you would like to read today?" He accepted the book with slightly trembling hands. It was a story about a lonely lighthouse guiding ships through storms, a continuation of the blue boat narrative he had heard days before. He sat in the chair beside the bed and began to read, his voice initially hesitant, then gaining confidence. As he read, he observed Arthur's face, noticing how his eyes followed the illustrations, how his expression subtly changed with the events of the story. There was life there, contained, fragile, but undeniably present. When he finished, he closed the book and remained silent for a moment. Caroline had discreetly withdrawn, leaving father and son alone. Dr. Maurice felt an overwhelming need to say something true, something beyond the superficial conversations he had maintained for so long. "Arthur," he began, his voice low, "I'm so sorry. For so long, I didn't know how to be here with you. I was afraid. I still am. But I'm trying. I'll keep trying." The boy looked at him with an intensity that made Dr. Maurice wonder how much he truly understood. Then, in a movement that seemed to require enormous effort, Arthur lightly moved the fingers of one hand, not an involuntary spasm, but a deliberate gesture, as if trying to reach out to his father. Dr. Maurice held that hand carefully, feeling an emotion so intense it seemed physically painful. It was the first gesture initiated by Arthur towards him since the accident. Small, almost imperceptible, but monumental in its significance. When he finally left the room, he found Caroline in the corridor. She was arranging some materials, preparing to end her shift. "What happened today, ... Double quotes he began, not knowing how to express the enormity of what he had witnessed. "It was Arthur," she replied simply. "He's finding his way back." "How? How did you manage in weeks what entire teams of specialists couldn't in years?" Caroline smiled softly. "I didn't make Arthur react, Mr. Alden. I just stayed present until he felt safe enough to show himself again. He's the one doing all the hard work." There was a profound wisdom in those simple words that challenged Doctor. Until then, he had treated his son's recovery as a problem to be solved with sufficient resources, when in fact it was a journey that needed to be accompanied with patience and presence. "I need to tell you something," Dr. Morris said suddenly. "About the night of the accident." Karen watched him intently, with no haste or judgment in her gaze. "We ... argued, Eliza and I, about my absence, about how I was always too busy to be present. I was driving too fast, angry. When the tire blew out on the bend, ... quotes, his voice failed. Mr. Alden ... quotes, no, I need to say this. For 2 years, I hid inefficiency, in protocols, in equipment. It was easier to turn everything to look into a manageable operation than to face what had happened. Absence. My guilt." Carolyn remained silent for a moment, absorbing the confession. Then she spoke, her voice soft but firm. "Guilt is too heavy an anchor to carry indefinitely. It has its purpose. It makes us acknowledge mistakes, take responsibility. But then, we need to transform it into something more useful. Like what? Courage to stay, even when it hurts, even when we're afraid." The words echoed in the silent corridor like a fundamental truth Dr. Maurice had avoided for too long. To stay, to be present, when all his instincts screamed to flee, to hide in work, in numbers, in efficiency. "What do I do now?" The question came out almost as a whisper. "Keep coming back. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Arthur needs to know you're here to stay." That night, after Caroline retired to her room, Dr. Maurice couldn't sleep. He walked through the silent mansion, visiting spaces he had avoided for years, the piano in the living room that Eliza loved to play, the reading nook where they used to gather on Friday evenings, the studio where she drew her architectural projects with Arthur, often by her side, scribbling on his own papers. Each space contained memories he had locked away, trying to move forward through control and efficiency. Now they unfolded around him like flowers after rain, painful in their beauty, necessary in their reminder of what truly mattered. He returned to his own room at dawn, exhausted, but with a clarity he hadn't felt in years. As he watched the sun rise over the garden, he made a decision that would change everything from then on. The dawn brought Dr. Maurice a resolution that seemed both terrifying and inevitable. After breakfast, he called a meeting with the entire medical team and household staff. Seated at the head of the large meeting table, he observed the familiar faces, competent professionals he had hired to maintain the impeccable operation his house had become. "As of today," he announced, "there will be significant changes in how we conduct things here." Helen and Dr. Vance exchanged apprehensive glances. "First, the protocols will be more flexible. The rigid schedules for essential medication and treatments will be maintained. But other activities will be adapted according to Arthur's interest and response, not according to pre-established timetables." He paused, observing the reaction of those present. Some seemed confused, others clearly relieved. Second, I will significantly reduce my external professional obligations for the next few months. I will establish a permanent office here at home and delegate most executive functions to the board of directors. This declaration caused genuine surprise. Everyone knew Dr. Moros's almost obsessive dedication to the business empire he had built. Third, and most importantly, from now on, our priority will not only be Arthur's physical recovery, but his emotional well-being and quality of life. This means fewer tests, less constant assessments, and more meaningful experiences. Dr. Vance cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. Mr. Alden, I understand your motivation, but I must warn you that deviating from the established protocol could compromise the physical progress we have achieved so far. Dr. Maurice looked at him with new assurance. Doctor, I appreciate your concern. Essential treatments will be maintained, but in recent days, I have witnessed more progress with simple human approaches than with 2 years of rigid protocols. I am not discarding science, I am balancing it with something we neglected. After the meeting, as the professionals dispersed to adapt to the new guidelines, Dr. Morris sought out Caroline. He found her in the winter garden, preparing materials for the morning session with Arthur. I would like you to coordinate the changes in his routine, he requested. You seem to understand what he needs better than any of us. Caroline smiled, genuinely surprised. That's a great responsibility, Mr. Alden. Morris, he corrected. I think, after everything, we can drop the formalities. She nodded, accepting the offer of proximity. Do you have anything specific in mind for today? She asked. Actually, yes. He hesitated, then continued. I thought of bringing the tablet with some old photos and videos of the family from before. And perhaps ... music. Eliza loved playing the guitar, and we have recordings of her playing. The suggestion revealed a profound change for the first time. Dr. Maurice was willing to bring the past into the present, not as a painful ghost to be avoided, but as a memory to be honored. I think that would be wonderful, Caroline replied. Arthur needs connection to his complete history. The following weeks brought visible changes to the Alden mansion. The permanently closed curtains were opened, allowing natural light to flood the rooms. The sepulchral silence was replaced by occasional sounds of music, conversations, even laughter from staff who now felt more at ease, interacting naturally. Arthur's room, once dominated by medical equipment, gained personal elements, family photographs, colorful books, even a small aquarium with tropical fish he could observe from his bed. The space now reflected not only his clinical needs, but his identity as a person. And Dr. Maurice, the man who once hid in work and efficiency, was now a constant presence, not just in special sessions or scheduled moments, but in simple, daily life meals, sunbathing in the garden, afternoon reading sessions. On one of those afternoons, while helping Caroline position Arthur near the window to watch birds, Dr. Maurice noticed something new. The boy seemed stronger, more present in his own body. His eyes followed movements with greater precision, and occasionally his fingers showed voluntary movements, especially when something captured his interest. He's more connected, he commented to Caroline, as they adjusted the pillow supporting his son's head. He always was, she replied softly. Now he's safer to show it. That simple observation stirred a wave of emotion in Dr. Maurice. The idea that his son had been present, conscious, all that time of silence was simultaneously comforting and devastating. What must he have felt observing the world around him without being able to communicate. How much of his apparent absence had been a voluntary retreat, a protection against an environment that didn't know how to reach him. That night, following Caroline's suggestion, Dr. Maurice decided to try something new. He entered Arthur's room after dinner, carrying his personal tablet. The boy was already prepared for sleep, comfortably positioned among pillows. "Hi, son," he greeted, sitting on the edge of the bed. "I thought I'd bring something different today." He opened the music application and selected a playlist he had carefully created during the day, songs Eliza loved. Melodies that used to fill their Friday evenings when the three of them gathered in the living room. The first was a Burt Bacharach composition, "The Look of Love," performed by Dusty Springfield. The initial piano notes filled the room, instantly creating a different atmosphere. Dr. Maurice observed Arthur's face, looking for any sign of recognition or discomfort. The boy's eyes widened slightly, focusing on the tablet from which the sound came. "Your mother loved this song," he commented softly, "on summer nights when we opened all the windows to the breeze. She would dance barefoot round the living room while you tried to keep up by clapping your hands." It was the first time he had shared such a specific and personal memory. The words came with pain, but also with a strange sense of relief, like fresh air entering a long-closed room. Arthur kept his eyes fixed on his father, an intensity in his gaze that suggested more than simple attention. There seemed to be recognition, perhaps even a hunger for these connections to the past. When you were about 4, you made a paper microphone and would sing this song all over the house. You didn't get half the words right, but the rhythm, you caught the rhythm perfectly. As he spoke, Dr. Maurice gently held Arthur's motionless hand, stroking it with his thumb in circular movements. It was no longer the clinical, distant touch he had maintained for so long, but a genuine contact, laden with affection and presence. The songs followed one another, each bringing a story, a memory Dr. Maurice shared in a low voice. Some brought tears to his eyes, others evoked nostalgic smiles. Arthur followed everything with absolute attention, his eyes rarely leaving his father's face. When it was the turn of "I Say a Little Prayer," Dr. Maurice paused longer. That had been the song for his first dance at his wedding with Eliza, and later it became Arthur's favorite lullaby. "She sang this to you every night," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "Even when she came home late from a project. She would go into your room just to sing this song before you completely fell asleep. The soft melody enveloped the room like a familiar embrace." Dr. Maurice closed his eyes for a moment, allowing himself to feel Eliza's presence in those notes, in the shared memory, in the space between him and his son. When he opened his eyes again, he saw that Arthur was looking at him with a different expression. There was something in his gaze that seemed to break down barriers. The boy moved his lips slightly, a visible effort concentrated on his face, and then, like a miracle born of music and shared memory, came the sound, hoarse, low, fragile, but unmistakable. "Dad." A single syllable that cut through 2 years of silence like a ray of light through darkness. Dr. Maurice froze, unable to believe what he had just heard. Tears came instantly, without any attempt to hold them back. "Arthur," he whispered, leaning closer. "You spoke. You." The effort was visible on the boy's face. Concentration, determination, every muscle fighting against limitations imposed by trauma. His lips moved again, forming the same word, "Dad." It was not illusion, nor projected desire. It was real, his son's voice, finding its way through the silence that had imprisoned him for so long. "Doctor." Morris wept openly, without any pretense of composure. He held Arthur's hand with both of his, bringing it to his lips in a gesture of gratitude and reverence. "I'm here," he replied between sobs. "I'm here, son. And I'm not going anywhere." The music continued, enveloping father and son in a cocoon of sound and emotion. For how long they remained like this, Dr. Maurice couldn't say. Time seemed suspended in that sacred moment of reconnection. Eventually, he noticed that Arthur was beginning to fall asleep, the effort of communication clearly having exhausted his strength. With infinite care, he adjusted the pillows and blanket and leaned in to kiss his forehead. "Rest now," he whispered. "I'll be here when you wake up." As he left the room, he found Caroline in the corridor. His face still showed clear signs of crying, but there was something else there. A light that had been absent for a long time. "He spoke," he said simply. "He said, Dad." Caroline's smile was luminous. "The first of many steps," she replied. "Small, perhaps, but significant." Dr. Maurice nodded, absorbing the enormity of the moment. "How can I thank you for all this?" "For everything you've done." "It wasn't me," she replied with simplicity. "It was Arthur. It was you, finally present to receive him back. I just created the space for it to happen." There was a profound wisdom in her simple words that resonated with Dr. Maurice. His whole life had been built on the premise that problems could be solved with sufficient resources, money, technology, specialists. But the miracle he had just witnessed came from something much simpler and much harder: presence. To be truly there, even when it hurt, even when it seemed useless. "What happens now?" he asked, almost to himself. "Now you continue," Caroline replied. "One day at a time. There will be challenges, setbacks, difficult days. But there will also be more words, more laughter, more connection." The next day, the Alden mansion dawned differently. The windows were opened earlier, allowing the morning breeze to circulate freely. The music that was once confined to specific moments now played softly in various rooms. Staff commented, surprised, on the change in atmosphere, as if the house was thawing after a long winter. Normally the first to get up to check emails, stayed in his room longer. When he finally came down for breakfast, he surprised Helen by asking for Arthur's breakfast to be served on the veranda. "On the veranda, sir." "Yes, it's a beautiful day. I think he'd like to feel the morning sun." The housekeeper nodded, hiding a small smile. In a few minutes, she arranged a table on the spacious veranda, overlooking the garden, white tablecloths, fresh flowers, a setting that resembled a family breakfast more than a clinical meal. When Caroline helped bring Arthur outside, the boy blinked several times, adjusting to the more intense natural light. But soon his eyes opened completely, absorbing the surrounding scenery, the lush garden, the birds flying among the trees, the intensely blue sky that London occasionally offered. Dr. Maurice watched, amazed, as his son's face lit up with the stimulation of a world beyond the walls of his room. There was a vivacity in his expression, a sparkle in his eyes that spoke of presence, of active participation in the moment. During breakfast, a small blue butterfly briefly landed on the table near Arthur's plate. The boy followed it with his eyes, and then, to the astonishment and joy of everyone present, his lips curved into an unmistakable smile. Small, contained, but real. Maurice exchanged an emotional glance with Caroline, who nodded in silent recognition. It was not just a reflex or a spasm. It was a genuine expression of pleasure. another window opening in the soul that had remained closed to the world for so long. After breakfast, while Caroline helped Arthur with his morning exercises, Dr. Morris called Helen to his office. "I want to make some changes to the house," he announced. "The clock in the living room, the one that stops when someone passes by, to avoid noises that might disturb Arthur. I want it to work normally again." Helen seemed surprised. "Are you sure, sir? The ticking is quite audible." "I am. A house needs to have sounds of life. And the windows, I want them open whenever the weather permits. Fresh air, street sounds, all of it." These were symbolic changes, but deeply significant. The mansion, which had become a sterile isolation chamber, was gradually returning to life. Not to the life before, that was irretrievably lost with Eliza's passing, but to a new kind of existence where joy and pain could coexist, where the present was no longer sacrificed in the name of the past. In the weeks that followed, each day brought small discoveries, small miracles. Arthur began to use simple words more frequently. Yes, no, water, music, always with great effort, always as monumental achievements. His fingers gained more mobility, allowing him to communicate also through light squeezes or indicative movements. Physiotherapy, once a series of mechanical exercises, became more integrated into daily life. Music, stories, and games made the movements more natural and less clinical. Dr. Maurice remained faithful to his resolution. He completely reorganized his professional life, delegating responsibilities and creating a system that allowed him to be present daily. Morning coffees on the veranda became a sacred ritual, as did nightly readings and music sessions. On one particularly significant afternoon, he finally gathered the courage to push Arthur's chair to the living room piano, a space they had both avoided since the accident. The instrument, always impeccably tuned, even without use, gleamed under the light pouring in through the open windows. "Your mother loved to play here on Sunday afternoons," Dr. Maurice commented, positioning the chair near the piano. "Do you remember? You two had a special duet. She played the main melody, and you accompanied with bass notes." Hesitantly, he opened the key cover and played a few simple notes. The crystal-clear sound filled the room, echoing on the walls like a living presence. Arthur watched intently, his eyes fixed on the moving keys. "Want to try?" Dr. Maurice asked, indicating the piano. The response came in the form of an affirmative head movement, small but unmistakable. Carefully, Dr. Maurice adjusted the chair and guided Arthur's hand to the keys. Together, they pressed a few notes, a simple, imperfect melody, but laden with meaning. It was a bridge being rebuilt, not just between father and son, but between present and past, between loss and possibility. The music they created together didn't resemble the elaborate duets of old, but it carried its own beauty, born of overcoming and persistence. Caroline, observing discreetly from the doorway, smiled as she witnessed the moment. Her mission there was almost complete, she knew. She had created the space for father and son to find their way back to each other, for the house to become a home again. On a Sunday morning, a few months after her arrival, she sought out Dr. Maurice for an important conversation. "I'm thinking it might be time to reduce my presence here," she explained. "Not abruptly, but gradually. Arthur is progressing wonderfully, and you two have found your own rhythm." Dr. Maurice felt a pang in his chest at the prospect of her departure, but understood the wisdom of that decision. "You will always have a place here," he replied, "not just as a professional, but as a friend, part of the family we've rebuilt." Caroline smiled, touched by the offer. "I'll visit. But now, Arthur needs to expand his circle, connect with other people, with the world beyond these walls. And you are more than prepared to guide him on that journey." She was right. Dr. Maurice knew. The road ahead would still be challenging. Arthur still had significant physical limitations, and communication, though growing, remained restricted. But something fundamental had changed. Hope was no longer an occasional visitor, but a constant presence in the house. On Caroline's last afternoon, as a full-time caregiver, the three went to the garden. Autumn painted the leaves in shades of gold and red, creating a scene of melancholic beauty. Arthur, now more expressive, smiled as he watched a squirrel leap among the branches. "Thank you," Dr. Maurice said, "for showing us the way back to each other." Caroline shook her head. "You always knew the way. You just needed the courage to walk it." There was a profound truth in that statement. The transformation they had witnessed in recent months had not come from revolutionary techniques or cutting-edge equipment, but from something much simpler and much harder: the willingness to be present, even in silence, even in pain. The sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Arthur pointed upwards, drawing both their attention to the spectacle. "Pretty," he said, the word still laborious but clear. "Yes, son," Dr. Maurice agreed, holding his hand. "Very pretty." As they watched the sun set together, the businessman reflected on the journey they had taken. There was no magical cure, no perfect solution for the losses they had suffered. Arthur would continue to face enormous challenges, and Eliza's absence would always be a pain they would live with. But amidst the limitations and absences, they had rediscovered something essential: the ability to be truly present, for the moment, for beauty, for each other. And in that presence, they found not only comfort, but the possibility of joy, of connection, of new beginnings. The Alden mansion, once a mausoleum of efficiency and control, was gradually returning to being a home, imperfect, scarred, but alive. The living room clock ticked again. Open windows allowed the world to enter, and music, once silenced by pain, filled the rooms once more. In Arthur's room, Caroline's music box remained on the bedside table. Every night before sleeping, a father and son turned the small golden key together, allowing the soft melody to lull them with its simple and profound promise: new beginnings are built slowly, with soft music, patience, and the courage to stay. End of story, dear listeners. We hope Maurice and Arthur's journey has touched your hearts. This reunion between father and son reminds us that often, the most important miracles don't come from advanced technologies, but from the simple courage to be present. For more stories exploring the complexities of family relationships and paths to overcoming adversity, we have prepared a special playlist that can be accessed by clicking the link to the left of your screen. If this narrative resonated with you, be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video. Every day, we bring new stories that celebrate the resilience of the human spirit. Share your own experiences of new beginnings in the comments. Your story might be exactly what someone needs to hear today.